The flatboat cut through the Mississippi's murky water like a blade through flesh, slow and deliberate. Isaiah pressed his scarred palm against the rough wood of the boat's edge, feeling the vibration of the current beneath. 23 souls stood or sat around him, chained loosely at the ankles, just enough to remind them of what they were now, but not so much as to damage the merchandise. The air hung thick with August heat, the kind that made breathing feel like swallowing wet cotton. Spanish moss draped from cypress trees along the banks like the hair of drowning women, and somewhere in the green darkness beyond, an alligator bellowed its territorial claim. "Oak Valley!" the boatman called out, pointing ahead with a gnarled finger. "Y'all belong to Colonel Harrow now. Best plantation in Louisiana, they say. Clean, orderly, peaceful." Isaiah studied the man's face, looking for the lie. White men always lied when they described a plantation as peaceful. Peace for them meant blood for everyone else, but the boatman's expression held something else, not deceit exactly, but uncertainty, as if he didn't quite believe his own words. The plantation emerged from the morning mist like a ghost materializing. Oak Valley sat on a slight rise, unusual for the Delta, where most land fought a losing battle against swamp. Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story made an impression on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. The main house stood 3 stories tall, painted white but graying with age and humidity. Columns rose along the front porch, attempting grandeur, but achieving only a kind of faded arrogance. But it was the grounds that struck Isaiah as wrong. The fields stretched out in perfect rows, cotton plants heavy with bolls that would be ready for harvest soon. Work gangs moved through the rows with mechanical precision, their hoes rising and falling in perfect rhythm. No overseer walked among them. No whip cracked the air. The workers simply moved, uniform and silent, like parts of some great machine. "Lord, have mercy," whispered Sarah, a young woman who'd been sold away from her children in Georgia. She stood beside Isaiah, her eyes wide, they moving like the dead. The boat bumped against the dock, and 2 men approached to receive them. One was white, middle-aged, thin, with the calculating eyes of a bookkeeper. He carried a ledger, not a whip. The other was a massive black man, his face as expressionless as stone, wearing clothes too fine for field work. "I'm Mr. Jessup," the white man said, consulting his ledger. "I manage the plantation for Colonel Harrow. This is Marcus. He'll show you to your quarters and explain the rules. Colonel Harrow runs a Christian establishment. You'll work hard, but you'll be treated fairly. Obey, and you'll find Oak Valley to be agreeable." Isaiah watched Marcus as the chains were removed from their ankles. The big man's eyes swept over them without interest, without recognition of shared bondage. It was as if he looked at furniture or livestock, objects without kinship. They were led past the main house, past the cotton gin, past neat rows of slave cabins that seemed almost comfortable compared to the rotting shacks Isaiah had known in Virginia. Everything was clean, orderly, wrong. "Where are the children?" Sarah asked suddenly. "I hear no children playing." Marcus stopped, turning to look at her with those dead eyes. When he spoke, his voice was flat, without inflection. "Children work in the morning, they rest in the afternoon. Then evening prayers. There is a schedule. Everyone follows the schedule." "But surely they play sometime." "There is no need for play," Marcus interrupted. "There is work, there is rest, there is prayer, there is contentment." That word, contentment, hung in the humid air like a curse. They were divided by gender and assigned to cabins. Isaiah found himself in a long room with 12 bunks, all precisely made with coarse blankets folded at identical angles. The men who already occupied the cabin sat on their bunks, staring at nothing, waiting for the bell that would call them to supper. Isaiah approached an older man with grey hair and burned scars on his arms. A fellow blacksmith, he guessed. "Brother," Isaiah said softly. "I'm Isaiah. Come from Virginia. What's your name?" The man looked up slowly, his eyes focusing on Isaiah as if from a great distance. "Samuel," he said finally, "I work the forge. How long you been here?" "Time." Samuel's brow furrowed, as if the question confused him. "Time is... there was before. Now there is now. The days are good. The work is satisfying. Colonel Harrow is fair." The words came out rehearsed, like a child reciting catechism. Isaiah felt ice crawl up his spine despite the heat. "Samuel," he pressed, "you ever think about running, about freedom?" The older man's face went blank, then twisted with what might have been pain or confusion. "Freedom?" He repeated the word, as if trying to remember its meaning. I think I... His hands began to tremble. No, I don't think about that. I don't think about anything except the work. The work makes me happy. Colonel Harrow makes us happy." Isaiah backed away, his heart hammering. He looked around the cabin at the other men, all sitting in that same passive way, and felt fear unlike anything he'd known. Not the fear of the whip or the auction block, but something deeper. The fear of seeing humanity hollowed out from the inside. That night, at supper in the common house, Isaiah observed everything with the attention his father had taught him, the attention that kept blacksmiths from losing fingers, from burning themselves, from dying young. "Notice everything," his father had said. "The world tells you its secrets if you watch close enough." He noticed the food was better than any slave rations he'd ever seen. Cornbread with actual fat, beans with bits of pork, even fresh vegetables. He noticed everyone ate in complete silence. No conversation, no laughter, no complaints. He noticed the way people's hands moved in exact unison, lifting spoons, chewing, swallowing, as if choreographed. He noticed that Sarah, sitting across from him, had tears running silently down her face, though her expression remained placid. After supper, they were led to a small chapel for evening prayers. Colonel Harrow himself appeared, a tall man in his 50s, with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Beside him stood another white man, shorter, with a French accent and the delicate hands of someone who'd never done physical labor. "Welcome to Oak Valley," Harrow said, his voice warm and paternal. "I want you to understand that this is a special place. Here we've discovered the secret to true Christian happiness: obedience without resentment, work without weariness, contentment without complaint. Dr. Vauclair and I have dedicated ourselves to creating a paradise on earth where master and servant exist in perfect harmony." The Frenchman, Dr. Vauclair, smiled and nodded, his eyes roaming over the new arrivals like a butcher evaluating cuts of meat. "Tomorrow," Harrow continued, "you'll begin your transition. Each of you will spend some time in what we call the happiness room. It's a place of transformation where we help you release your burdens, your anger, your unsuitable thoughts. You'll emerge renewed, ready to embrace the beautiful life we offer here." Isaiah felt Sarah's hand grip his arm, her nails digging into his flesh. He didn't dare turn to look at her. Instead, he kept his eyes forward, passive, trying to look as empty as the others while his mind raced. That night, lying in his bunk, Isaiah listened to the sounds of the plantation. No songs drifted from the cabins as they did on every other plantation he'd known. No voices murmured in the darkness, plotting or praying or simply talking to keep the loneliness at bay. There was only silence, broken occasionally by a soft whimper, quickly stifled. He thought of his wife, sold away 3 years ago. He thought of his daughter, who would be 7 now, if she still lived. He thought of freedom, that dangerous word that had sustained him through beatings and humiliation and despair. He thought of it hard, memorizing the feeling of it, afraid that tomorrow it might be taken from him. Outside, an owl called. The wind moved through the oaks, and somewhere beneath the barn, in a cellar Isaiah couldn't yet see, copper instruments waited in the darkness, gleaming and patient as death itself. The happiness room was ready for its next guest. Morning came with a bell that clanged with mechanical precision at exactly 5 o'clock. Isaiah woke with his heart already racing, the memory of Colonel Harrow's words from the night before echoing in his mind. "You'll spend some time in what we call the happiness room." The men around him rose in eerie synchronization, dressing in their work clothes without speaking, without the usual morning grumbles and jokes that defined slave cabins everywhere. They moved like puppets on invisible strings, and Isaiah had to force himself to match their pace, to blend in. Breakfast was the same silent affair as supper had been: grits, bacon, biscuits that would be considered luxurious on any other plantation. Isaiah ate slowly, studying faces. Across the table, he caught Sarah's eye. She looked terrified, her hands shaking as she lifted her spoon. Two other new arrivals sat nearby: a young man named Thomas, who'd been a field hand in Mississippi, and an older woman called Mama Ruth, who'd been a cook. They were the only ones who looked alive. After breakfast, Mr. Jessup appeared with his ledger. "Isaiah," he called out, "you're first today. Follow Marcus." Isaiah's stomach dropped, but he stood, keeping his face neutral. The big man led him across the compound, past the cotton fields where workers moved in their disturbing rhythm, past the cookhouse and the well, toward a large barn that sat slightly apart from the other structures. The barn looked ordinary enough from outside: weathered wood, a peaked roof, double doors standing open to reveal farming equipment and hay bales. But Marcus led him past all of this to a small door at the back, half hidden behind a stack of crates. The door opened onto stairs leading down into darkness. "Go," Marcus said, his voice as flat as ever. "Dr. Vauclair is waiting." Isaiah descended into a cellar lit by oil lamps, their flames casting dancing shadows on brick walls. The air was cooler here, but it carried a strange chemical smell, something like the doctor's offices he'd been in before, mixed with something else, something wrong. The cellar had been transformed into what looked like a medical facility. Copper instruments hung on the walls, gleaming in the lamplight. Glass jars filled with clear and colored liquids lined wooden shelves. In the center of the room sat a chair that looked like a dentist's apparatus, but modified. Leather straps on the arms and legs, a metal brace for the head. Dr. Vauclair stood beside a table covered with notebooks and strange tools. He looked up as Isaiah entered, his smile pleasant and professional. "Ah, Isaiah, welcome. Please don't be frightened. This is a place of healing, of transformation." "What are you going to do to me?" Isaiah asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Make you happy," Vauclair replied simply. "Remove your pain, your anger, your unhelpful thoughts. You'll work better, sleep better, live better. Isn't that what everyone wants, to be free from suffering?" "I want to be free," Isaiah said. Vauclair's smile didn't waver. "Yes, but freedom is such a complicated thing, isn't it? Freedom to starve, freedom to watch your family be destroyed, freedom to be hunted like an animal. The freedom I offer is much more genuine, freedom from want, from fear, from the burden of impossible dreams." He gestured to the chair. "Please sit. This will only take a few hours." Isaiah didn't move. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do anything but sit in that chair. But where could he run? The swamp surrounded the plantation, deadly even if he could escape the grounds. And fighting would only bring more violence, solve nothing. "If I refuse?" he asked. Vauclair's expression hardened slightly. "Then Marcus will force you, and the procedure is much more difficult when the patient struggles. Much more damaging. Please, Isaiah, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Isaiah looked at the stairs behind him. Marcus stood there, blocking the way, his massive frame filling the narrow passage. The big man's eyes held no sympathy, no recognition of shared humanity. Whatever had been done to him had been done thoroughly. With legs that felt like lead, Isaiah walked to the chair and sat. "Excellent," Vauclair said, moving quickly to fasten the leather straps around Isaiah's wrists and ankles. The metal brace came around his head, holding it immobile. Now I'm going to inject you with something to help you relax. You'll feel drowsy, but you'll remain conscious. That's very important. You must be conscious for the treatment to work properly." Isaiah felt the needle's sting in his arm. Within moments, a strange lassitude spread through his body. His muscles went slack, his breathing slowed. But his mind remained alert, trapped in a body that would no longer obey him. Vauclair moved around him, preparing instruments. "You see, Isaiah, the problem with your people has always been memory. You remember Africa, freedom, family, pride. These memories make you unsuitable for the life God has planned for you. But memory, I have discovered, is not fixed. It can be edited." He held up a thin copper probe attached to a strange electrical device by wires. "This is my most important tool. When applied to specific points, particularly behind the eyes, where the optic nerve connects to the brain, it can disrupt the formation of new memories and weaken old ones. Combined with chemical treatments and suggestion, it allows me to reshape the mind itself." Isaiah tried to scream, but his throat wouldn't work. He could only watch as Vauclair approached with the probe. "Don't worry," the doctor said softly. "The pain will be temporary, and then you won't remember it at all." Up. The probe touched the corner of Isaiah's eye, and electricity shot through his brain. Reality shattered into fragments, faces, voices, sensations all colliding and breaking apart. He saw his wife smile, felt his daughter's hand in his, heard his father teaching him to work the forge. Then those images began to blur, to fade, as if someone was washing them away with acid. "That's it," Vauclair murmured. "Let them go. They only cause you pain." But Isaiah fought. With every fragment of will he possessed, he fought to hold on to those memories. He pictured his wife's face in excruciating detail, the scar on her chin, the way she hummed while she worked, the exact shade of brown in her eyes. He remembered the day his daughter was born, the weight of her in his arms, the first time she called him Papa. The electricity came again, stronger. Isaiah's body convulsed against the restraints. But in his mind, he built walls around his memories, brick by brick, defending them like a fortress under siege. Vauclair frowned, checking his instruments. "Unusual resistance," he muttered. "The dosage should be sufficient." He adjusted something, and the next surge of electricity was like being struck by lightning. Isaiah's vision went white. For a moment, he thought he'd lost everything, that the doctor had finally broken through his defenses. But when the whiteness cleared, the memories were still there, damaged, fragmented, but present. His wife's name wouldn't come to him, but he remembered the shape of her. His daughter's face was blurred, but he remembered holding her. Vauclair worked for hours, using electricity and chemicals and hypnotic suggestions. He showed Isaiah images, Colonel Harrow's beneficent smile, the peaceful fields, the good food, the comfortable cabins. He spoke in a low, rhythmic voice about contentment, obedience, happiness. "You don't need freedom," he whispered. "Freedom is suffering. Here you are fed, clothed, protected. Here you have purpose. Let go of those painful memories. Embrace the peace we offer." Isaiah's body was no longer his own. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't resist physically. But in the sanctuary of his mind, he held on to one thought, one truth. "This is wrong. What they're doing is wrong. I have to remember. I have to tell." Finally, exhausted, Vauclair stepped back. "I don't understand," he said, more to himself than to Isaiah. "The treatment should have worked completely. Perhaps the sickness has made him resistant somehow. The weak constitution, the scarred lungs." He made notes in his book, then began unfastening the restraints. "We'll try again tomorrow," he said. "And the next day, if necessary. Eventually, everyone succumbs." When Isaiah could move again, Marcus helped him up the stairs. His legs wouldn't work properly, and his head throbbed with pain, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. But underneath the pain was something else, a grim satisfaction. He had resisted, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. He was led back to his cabin, where the other new arrivals watched with frightened eyes. Sarah rushed to him as soon as Marcus left. "Isaiah! Isaiah, can you hear me?" He focused on her face with difficulty. "I can hear you," he said, and even though the words came out slurred, they were his words, not the flat, rehearsed phrases the others used. "What did they do to you?" "Tried to take my memories, my thoughts, tried to make me like them." He gestured weakly at the other men in the cabin, still sitting on their bunks in passive silence. "But I fought. Sarah, I fought, and I held on to something." Tears streamed down her face. "They're going to do it to all of us, aren't they?" "Yes." Isaiah gripped her hand. "Listen to me. When they take you down there, you have to fight. Hold on to one memory, one person, one thing that makes you you. Build a wall around it. Don't let them have everything." Thomas, the young field hand, knelt beside them. "What's the point of fighting? Look at them." He indicated the other men. "They're gone. Whatever made them human is gone. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's easier to just give in." "No," Isaiah said with surprising force. "You give in, and you're dead even though your heart keeps beating. You're nothing but a tool, a machine. That's what Harrow wants. Perfect slaves who don't remember what they've lost." Mama Ruth joined them, her weathered face set with determination. "My grandmother was brought over on a slave ship," she said quietly. "She told me stories about the Middle Passage, how some people threw themselves into the ocean rather than submit. How others held on to their names, their gods, their languages, even when they were beaten for it. She said the worst slavery isn't chains on your body, it's chains on your mind. And once you let them put those chains on, once you stop remembering who you were, you're truly lost." "Then we fight," Sarah said. "All of us. We protect our memories however we can." Over the next 3 days, each of them was taken to the happiness room. Sarah came back weeping but aware. Thomas emerged, silent and shaking, but still himself. Mama Ruth walked out with her head held high, though her hands trembled. But not everyone was as successful. 2 other new arrivals, a woman named Betty and a young man called James, came back changed. Their eyes had that same empty look as the others, their movements the same mechanical precision. When Sarah tried to speak to Betty, the woman looked at her without recognition, without any spark of connection. "The work is good," Betty said in that flat, rehearsed voice. "Colonel Harrow is kind. I am content." Sarah turned away, sobbing. At night, the 5 who had resisted would gather in whispered conference, sharing what they'd learned, trying to understand what was happening to them. "He's doing something with electricity," Isaiah explained, "and chemicals, trying to disrupt memory formation. But if you focus hard enough on something, a face, a name, a place, you can keep it, not everything, but something." "How long can we keep fighting?" Thomas asked. "He said they'll take us back until it works." "Then we find a way to stop him," Isaiah said. "We find out what he's doing and we destroy it." "How?" Sarah asked. "We're watched constantly. Marcus follows us everywhere." Isaiah thought of the cellar, the instruments, the notebooks full of Vauclair's observations. "He keeps records," he said slowly. "Everything he does, he writes down. If we could get those records, if we could show people what's happening here." "Who would we show?" Mama Ruth asked bitterly. "White folks don't care what happens to us. And even if they did, Harrow would say we're lying. Then we show other slaves," Isaiah said. "On other plantations, we let them know what's happening here, what Harrow and Vauclair are doing. Maybe it spreads. Maybe people refuse to be sold here. Maybe buyers stay away if they know their property will come out damaged." It was a desperate plan, built on unlikely hopes, but it was something. Something other than passive submission to the horror that awaited them. The next day, Isaiah was told to report to the forge. His smithing skills were needed to repair equipment. He was led there by Marcus, who watched him with those dead eyes as he worked the bellows and heated iron. The forge sat at the edge of the barn complex, the same barn that housed the happiness room in its cellar. As Isaiah hammered out a bent plough blade, He studied the building, looking for weaknesses, for opportunities. And that night, after everyone was supposed to be asleep, he made his move. Isaiah waited until the small hours of morning, when even the guards posted around the plantation grew drowsy. The cabin was silent except for the soft breathing of sleeping men, some natural sleep, some the drugged slumber of those whose minds had been violated. He had been watching the guard rotations for 3 nights now, marking the patterns in his mind. There was a brief window just before dawn when the night guards were most tired and the morning shift hadn't yet begun. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, when the barn stood unwatched. Moving with the careful silence his father had taught him, a blacksmith learns to move quietly in the dark to avoid waking a household when working late. Isaiah slipped from his bunk. Sarah sat up, her eyes catching moonlight through the cabin's cracks. "Be careful," she mouthed. He nodded and eased the cabin door open. The hinges had been well oiled. Everything at Oak Valley was maintained with disturbing precision. The night air hit his face, warm and thick with moisture. Fog had rolled in from the swamp, making the plantation look like something from a ghost story. Isaiah moved between buildings, using the fog for cover. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might wake everyone, but he forced his breathing to stay calm, controlled. Fear was a tool, it sharpened the senses, but panic was death. The barn loomed out of the mist like a ship in harbor. Isaiah pressed himself against its wall, listening. No voices, no footsteps. Just the distant sound of the river and the buzz of insects in the swamp. He found the door at the back, the one that led down to the happiness room. It was locked, but the lock was simple, just a basic mechanism, nothing sophisticated. Isaiah pulled out a thin piece of metal he'd shaped at the forge that afternoon, ostensibly for repair work, but actually for this moment. His hands shook as he worked the lock. The metal scraped and clicked, sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. Sweat ran down his face despite the relative coolness. Any moment a guard might appear, might call out, might drag him to a punishment worse than anything he could imagine. The lock clicked open. Isaiah paused, listening. Still nothing. He eased the door open and slipped inside, closing it gently behind him. Total darkness enveloped him. He'd brought a small candle and matches stolen from the forge, and he lit it now with trembling hands. The flame revealed the stairs leading down, and Isaiah descended into the belly of Oak Valley's horror. The cellar was different at night. The medical instruments cast strange shadows in the candlelight, turning them into instruments of torture from medieval dungeons. The chair where Isaiah had been restrained looked like an execution device. The glass jars on the shelves seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Isaiah forced himself to move deeper into the room, toward the table where Vauclair kept his notebooks and papers. His candle illuminated page after page of meticulous observations, written in a mixture of French and English. Subject 47, Marcus. Complete compliance achieved after 6 treatments. Memory suppression total. Subject shows no signs of resistance or individual thought. Perfect specimen. Subject 112, Samuel. Moderate success. Some memory persistence, but behavior modification complete. Subject docile and productive. Subject 203, Isaiah. Significant resistance. Treatment partially effective, but subject retains core personality. Recommend extended sessions with increased electrical stimulus. Consider surgical intervention if chemical methods continue to fail. Isaiah's hands clenched on the notebook. Surgical intervention. They were planning to cut into his brain if the electricity and drugs didn't work. He flipped through more pages, finding worse horrors. Sketches showed the exact points where Vauclair applied his electrical probes, behind the eyes, at the base of the skull, along the temples. Notes described the effects: memory loss, personality changes, complete behavioral compliance. But it was another section that made Isaiah's blood run cold. Colonel Harrow's vision requires not just obedience, but inheritance. The next phase will involve breeding programs, selecting subjects whose resistance is lowest, whose compliance is highest. Their children will be born into the system, raised with the treatments from infancy. Within 2 generations, we can create a permanent slave caste that will never even conceive of freedom. Isaiah felt bile rise in his throat. They weren't just trying to control the current generation. They were planning to destroy the possibility of resistance forever, to breed a future where slavery was written into the very structure of the human mind. He turned to the shelves, examining the glass jars more closely. Each was labeled with a name and a date. Inside floated what looked like preserved tissue samples. But as Isaiah studied them, he realized they were something else. They were memory vessels. Vauclair's notes explained the theory. Certain chemicals, when introduced to brain tissue during the electrical treatments, could somehow capture fragments of memory and store them externally. It was pseudoscience, impossible according to everything Isaiah knew. But here were rows upon rows of jars, each labeled with a person's name. Marcus, memories of childhood. Samuel, memories of wife and children. Betty, memories of freedom. Isaiah understood with sickening clarity. Vauclair wasn't just suppressing memories. He was removing them, storing them, collecting them like specimens. Perhaps he planned to study them, to better understand how to break down future subjects. Perhaps he simply kept them as trophies of his triumph over the human spirit. Isaiah reached for Marcus's jar, thinking to smash it, to destroy this violation, but stopped. If the memories really were somehow stored here, destroying them might mean they could never be recovered. He didn't know if Vauclair's theories had any truth to them, but he couldn't risk it. Instead, he began gathering the jars carefully, placing them in a sack he'd brought. If he could get them away from the plantation, maybe someone could figure out if there was any way to restore what had been taken. A sound from above froze him in place. Footsteps on the barn floor above. Someone moving around. Isaiah blew out his candle immediately, plunging the cellar into darkness. He stood perfectly still, barely breathing, the sack of jars clutched to his chest. The footsteps moved across the barn, closer to the back door. Isaiah heard the handle rattle. The door's unlocked, a voice said. Marcus, someone's been here. Check below, came another voice. Mr. Jessup, the plantation manager. Light spilled down the stairs as someone opened the door above. Isaiah looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. The cellar was small, mostly open. There was a gap between 2 shelving units, barely wide enough for a man, and he squeezed into it, pressing himself against the brick wall, making himself as small as possible. Marcus descended the stairs with a lantern, his massive frame casting enormous shadows. He moved methodically, checking the room, his eyes scanning every corner with that empty, mechanical efficiency. Isaiah held his breath, the sack of jars pressed against his chest. One sound, one movement, and he was finished. Marcus walked past his hiding spot, close enough that Isaiah could have reached out and touched him. The big man paused, his head turning slowly, as if sensing something wrong. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still. Then he moved on, checking the rest of the cellar. Nothing here, Marcus called up. Maybe the wind opened it. Check it anyway, Jessup ordered. Vauclair will want to know if anything's been disturbed. Marcus examined the table, the notebooks, the shelves. His eyes passed over the empty spaces where Isaiah had taken the jars, but he showed no reaction, no alarm. Whatever capacity for noticing details he'd once possessed had been stripped away along with his memories. Finally, he turned and climbed back up the stairs. All secure, he reported. The door closed. The footsteps receded. Isaiah waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When he was certain they were gone, he emerged from his hiding place, legs cramping, heart still racing. He had the jars. He had seen the notebooks. He knew the full scope of what Harrow and Vauclair were planning. But now he had to get out, get back to his cabin, before the morning bell rang and his absence was discovered. The climb back up the stairs felt like climbing out of hell itself. Isaiah paused at the top, listening, then eased the door open. The fog was thinner now, the sky beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. He had perhaps 20 minutes before the plantation woke. He relocked the door. If they came back and found it unlocked again, they'd know someone had a key, and began making his way back across the compound. The sack of jars was heavier than he'd expected, and he had to move slowly to keep them from clinking together. Halfway to his cabin, he heard voices. The morning guards were beginning their rounds earlier than usual. Isaiah ducked behind the cookhouse, pressing himself against the wall. 2 men passed within feet of him, their conversation drifting in the pre-dawn air. More new arrivals today. Vauclair wants them brought in immediately. The treatment's taking longer on some of them. That blacksmith, he's been down there 4 times already. Vauclair says he'll break eventually. They all do. The guards moved on. Isaiah waited until they were gone, then sprinted the last distance to his cabin. He slipped inside just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. Sarah and Mama Ruth were awake, waiting anxiously. Thomas kept watch at the window. "Sweet Jesus," Mama Ruth whispered when she saw the sack. "What did you find?" Isaiah set the jars down carefully and began explaining what he'd seen, what he'd read in Vauclair's notebooks. As he spoke, the horror on their faces deepened. "They're planning to breed us," Sarah said, her voice choked with rage and despair. "To create what? A race of people who can't even think of freedom?" "That's the plan," Isaiah confirmed. 2 generations, Vauclair thinks. Maybe 3. Until there's no one left who remembers what it was like to be whole. Thomas picked up one of the jars, staring at the tissue floating inside. "You really think memories can be stored like this?" "It seems impossible." "I don't know," Isaiah admitted. "But Vauclair believes it, and he's succeeding at making people forget one way or another." "So what do we do?" Mama Ruth asked. "We can't fight them. We can't run. And now they're even stealing what's inside our heads." Isaiah thought about the notebooks, the sketches, the cold scientific language describing the destruction of human souls. He thought about Marcus, once a man with a life and family, now a hollow shell. He thought about the future Harrow and Vauclair envisioned, generations of people who would never even dream of freedom. "We tell everyone," he said finally. "Every slave on this plantation who still has their mind intact. We show them what's happening, what's planned, and we find a way to destroy the happiness room, the equipment, the notebooks, everything. Even if we can't escape, we can make sure this horror doesn't spread." "They'll kill us," Thomas said flatly. "Maybe," Isaiah agreed. "But better to die human than live as what they're trying to turn us into." The morning bell rang, harsh and insistent. The men around them, those who'd already been through the complete treatment, rose mechanically and began dressing for work. Isaiah, Sarah, Thomas, and Mama Ruth exchanged glances. They had perhaps a day, maybe 2, before one of them would be called back for another treatment. Before the weight of repeated sessions finally broke through their resistance, they had to act fast. "Tonight," Isaiah said quietly, "we gather everyone who's still aware. We tell them everything, and we make a plan." Outside, the plantation was waking. Guards took their positions. Work gangs assembled. The massive machinery of Oak Valley Plantation ground into motion, orderly, efficient, terrifying in its precision. But in one cabin, 5 people held onto their memories, their anger, their humanity. And they began to plan their resistance. The happiness room had claimed many victims. But it would not claim them, not without a fight. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Isaiah worked the forge, hammering out tools and repairs while his mind raced with plans and fears. Every time Marcus appeared to watch him, which was often, he had to force his face into a mask of calm, had to move with the mechanical precision of those who'd been fully broken. But inside, his thoughts churned like storm waters. Sarah worked in the main house that day, cleaning and serving. She moved through the rooms where Colonel Harrow and Dr. Vauclair discussed their work, and she listened with the careful attention of someone whose life depended on gathering information. Thomas was sent to the fields, where he labored alongside those who'd lost themselves. The horror of watching them work, seeing people who might have once sung, joked, complained, now moving in silent unison like parts of a machine, hardened his resolve. Mama Ruth was assigned to the kitchens. The head cook, an older woman named Agnes, had been at Oak Valley for 5 years. She moved with the same empty efficiency as the others, but Mama Ruth watched her carefully, looking for any spark of the person she'd once been. When the work bell rang at sunset, they gathered again in their cabin, but this time they weren't alone. Isaiah had quietly spread word during the day, a whisper here, a meaningful glance there, and now 6 others joined them. All were relatively new arrivals. All had been through the happiness room but not broken. All were terrified and angry in equal measure. "We don't have much time," Isaiah began, keeping his voice low. "Some of us will be called back to that cellar soon. Once they do the treatments enough times, we'll end up like—" He gestured toward the other men in the cabin, those who sat on their bunks staring at nothing. He pulled out the notebooks he'd stolen from the cellar. He'd hidden them among his blacksmith tools during the day and began reading passages aloud. The others listened with growing horror as Isaiah described Vauclair's methods, his theories, his plans for future generations. "Lord, have mercy," one man whispered. "They're trying to destroy our very souls." "Not just our souls," Sarah added. "Our children, our grandchildren. They want to create people who'll never even know they're supposed to be free." A woman named Grace spoke up. "What can we do? We're slaves. We can't fight them directly." "No," Isaiah agreed, "but we can make sure what they're doing here doesn't spread. We can destroy the happiness room, burn the notebooks, smash the equipment. Even if we die doing it, we make sure this horror ends here." "They'll kill us for sure if we do that," Thomas said. "They're killing us anyway," Mama Ruth replied sharply. "Just slowly, taking away everything that makes us who we are. I'd rather die fighting than become one of them." She pointed to the docile men on their bunks. "There's more," Sarah said. She'd been quiet until now, and everyone turned to look at her. "I heard them talking today. Harrow and Vauclair. They're planning to present their work to other plantation owners. Next month they're hosting a gathering, showing off their success, demonstrating the techniques. If other plantations start doing this..." The implication hung heavy in the air. Oak Valley could be just the beginning. If Harrow and Vauclair proved their methods worked, if other owners saw the benefit of slaves who never even thought of rebellion, this nightmare could spread across the entire South. "Then we have to act before that gathering," Isaiah said. "We destroy everything, the cellar, the equipment, the notebooks, and we have to make sure people know why. We can't just burn it down and stay silent. We have to tell the story." "How?" Grace asked. "Who's going to listen to us?" Isaiah thought about this. "Other slaves on other plantations, house servants who move between properties, boatmen on the river. We tell them what happened here. Maybe they won't believe us at first. But if the story spreads, if enough people hear it, maybe plantation owners will start to worry. Maybe they won't send people here, won't buy Oak Valley slaves. Maybe the economy of horror that Harrow has built will collapse." It was a desperate plan, built on fragile hopes. But it was all they had. They spent the next hour planning. Sarah would gather whatever she could from the main house. Matches, oil for lamps, anything that could help start a fire hot enough to destroy the cellar completely. Thomas would recruit others in the fields, finding anyone who showed signs of independent thought. Mama Ruth would work on the kitchen staff, trying to wake any dormant humanity in them. And Isaiah would create what he called their testimony, a written document describing everything that had happened at Oak Valley, everything that Harrow and Vauclair had done. He'd learned to read and write in secret years ago, a dangerous skill for a slave to possess, but now it might save them all. We hide copies everywhere, he explained. In the cabins, in the fields, even in the main house if we can. If we all die, at least the truth survives. At least people will know. As the meeting broke up, each person returning to their assigned sleeping place, Isaiah felt a hand on his arm. It was Mama Ruth. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. About Agnes, the head cook. What about her? She's not completely gone. I saw it today, just for a moment. Vauclair was visiting the kitchen, and when he turned his back, she made a face. Just a tiny grimace, gone in a second. But it was there, which means she's been pretending, maybe for years. Isaiah felt a spark of hope. Can you talk to her? I'll try. If she's been hiding her awareness this long, she might know things we don't, might have information that could help. That night, while the plantation slept, Isaiah worked by the light of a single candle, writing out the testimony in his careful script. He described the arrival at Oak Valley, the first hints that something was wrong, the happiness room, Vauclair's experiments. He wrote about the jars of memories, the breeding plans, the gathering of plantation owners that was planned. He wrote with the precision of a blacksmith shaping iron. Every word chosen carefully, every fact verified by what he'd seen and heard. This wasn't just a story, it was evidence, it was proof. As dawn approached, he had created something that terrified him, a document that, if found, would lead to his immediate execution, but it was also the most important thing he'd ever made. More important than any tool or weapon he'd forged. He carefully folded the papers and hid them in the hollow handle of a hammer, then created 2 more copies and hid them in different locations around the forge. The morning bell woke him after only an hour of sleep. Isaiah dragged himself from his bunk, exhausted but determined. They had perhaps 3 days before Harrow's gathering. 3 days to destroy the happiness room, to spread the truth, to strike back against the horror that had consumed Oak Valley. That afternoon, Mama Ruth managed to get Agnes alone in the kitchen storeroom. "I know you're still in there," Mama Ruth whispered. "I saw the look you gave Vauclair yesterday." Agnes froze, fear flashing across her usually blank face. "I don't know what you mean. I am content. Colonel Harrow—" "Stop!" Mama Ruth interrupted gently. "I'm not going to tell anyone. I need your help, please." For a long moment, Agnes stared at her. Then slowly the emptiness drained from her eyes, replaced by something fierce and alive. "How long have you known?" "Just since yesterday." "How long have you been pretending?" 3 years, Agnes said, her voice raw with suppressed emotion. 3 years of acting like a hollow doll while staying sane inside. Do you know what that's like? Watching others lose themselves while pretending you've already lost? Why did you do it? Because I saw what happened to people who resisted too obviously. They didn't just do more treatments. They did surgical procedures, cut into people's brains. I saw a man named Joseph who kept fighting. They took him into that cellar and he came out wrong. Not blank like the others, but broken. Couldn't walk right, couldn't talk, just made sounds. They said it was an accident, but I knew. They'd cut too deep, damaged him permanently. Agnes's hands shook, so I learned to pretend perfectly. I let them think they'd succeeded, and I survived. "We're planning something," Mama Ruth said. "We're going to destroy the happiness room, stop them from spreading this to other plantations. Will you help?" Agnes looked at her for a long moment. "If I help you, if this fails, they'll know I've been faking. They'll do to me what they did to Joseph. If we do nothing, they'll spread this everywhere. Your sacrifice, all those years of pretending, will mean nothing." Agnes closed her eyes. Mama Ruth could see the war happening inside her. Self-preservation against the chance to strike back. Fear against rage. Finally, Agnes opened her eyes. "What do you need?" "Information. How many guards at night? When do they change? Where is Harrow's room? Where does Vauclair sleep?" Agnes told them everything she knew. The guard rotations, the layout of the main house, the fact that Vauclair often worked late in the cellar, alone. She described the plantation's schedule, the routines, the weak points. "There's one more thing," Agnes said. "The gathering Harrow's planning. I heard him talking about it with Vauclair. They're bringing in plantation owners from across Louisiana, Mississippi, even Alabama. They're going to demonstrate the treatments on new subjects, show how quickly they can break someone's will. They're so confident they think nothing can go wrong. Then we'll prove them wrong," Mama Ruth said. That evening the resistance met again, now numbering 13 people who still possessed their minds. Isaiah shared what Agnes had revealed, and they refined their plan. "The gathering is in 2 days," Isaiah said. "We strike the night before. We burn the cellar, destroy the equipment, and we make sure those plantation owners arrive to find nothing but ashes and the truth of what Harrow was doing." "How do we make sure they learn the truth?" Thomas asked. Isaiah pulled out the testimony he'd written. "We leave these everywhere, in the house, in the visitors' quarters, in the barn, and we tell them, those of us who survive. We tell them what happened here, what was being done to us. Even if they don't care about our suffering, they'll care about the scandal. They'll care that one of their own was conducting medical experiments on slaves." It was a slim hope, relying on white men's sense of propriety rather than their humanity. But it might work. The public horror of what Harrow had done might outweigh any interest in replicating his methods. Sarah spoke up. "What about the people who've already been broken? Marcus, Samuel, Betty, all the others. What happens to them?" A heavy silence fell. No one had an answer. Even if they destroyed the happiness room, even if they stopped the experiments, there were dozens of people at Oak Valley who'd already lost themselves. Were they gone forever? Could they be healed? "I don't know," Isaiah admitted. "Maybe destroying the cellar is the first step. Maybe there's a way to help them recover. Or maybe," he trailed off, unable to voice the darker possibility. "We save who we can," Mama Ruth said firmly, "and we make sure no one else suffers this way." They spent the rest of the evening preparing. Sarah collected oil and matches from the main house. Thomas spread the word among the remaining aware slaves, finding 2 more who were willing to help. Agnes provided detailed drawings of the plantation's layout. Isaiah worked late into the night, creating more copies of the testimony, preparing tools they'd need to break into the cellar and disable any locks or barriers they might encounter. As he worked, he thought about the jars of memories still hidden in his cabin. Marcus's childhood, Samuel's family, Betty's sense of freedom. He didn't know if those memories could ever be restored, if Vauclair's pseudoscience had any basis in reality or was pure delusion. But he knew one thing. They couldn't let those jars be destroyed in the fire. They were all that remained of people who'd been stolen from themselves. Even if recovery was impossible, they deserved to be preserved, to be remembered. The night before the attack, Isaiah barely slept. He lay on his bunk, listening to the breathing of men who'd been robbed of their souls, thinking about his wife and daughter, about freedom, about the terrible risk they were about to take. But he also felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Tomorrow night they would strike back. They would resist. They would show Harrow and Vauclair and everyone else that you could not simply erase a person's humanity, no matter how sophisticated your methods. The next morning dawned grey and threatening, storm clouds gathering over the delta. Isaiah took it as an omen, one way or another. There would be thunder before this was over. The day of the planned uprising moved with the slow inevitability of a funeral procession. Isaiah worked the forge, hammering and shaping metal, but his mind was on the coming night. Every time the sky flashed with distant lightning from the approaching storm, his heart jumped. Around the plantation, the 13 conspirators moved through their assigned tasks, appearing docile, empty, safe. But beneath their carefully maintained masks, they were awake, alert, preparing for what might be their last night alive. The visitors began arriving at noon, wealthy plantation owners in fine carriages, bringing house slaves to attend them, curious to see Colonel Harrow's famous innovations in labor management. Isaiah watched them from the forge, these men in their expensive clothes, laughing and smoking cigars, discussing us as if we were livestock whose breeding and training could be optimized. Dr. Vauclair greeted them personally, playing the proud scientist, showing off his laboratory. Isaiah saw him leading groups toward the barn, toward the cellar entrance. They were giving tours, demonstrating the equipment, showing off their victims like prizes. Sarah, working in the house, watched as Colonel Harrow hosted a lavish dinner. The dining room blazed with candlelight, while in the kitchen, Agnes and other slaves prepared course after course. Sarah listened to the conversation drifting from the dining room, talk of productivity, of managing the Negro temperament, of how Harrow's methods could revolutionize the peculiar institution. They spoke of human beings as if discussing improvements to cotton gins. As darkness fell and the storm clouds gathered closer, the visitors retired to their quarters. They would witness a demonstration tomorrow. 2 newly arrived slaves would be processed through the happiness room, showing how quickly and efficiently Vauclair could break someone's will. The conspirators gathered one last time in Isaiah's cabin, waiting for the plantation to settle into sleep. The storm broke around 8 o'clock. Rain hammering down in sheets, thunder rolling across the delta, lightning turning night into brief, brilliant day. "Perfect," Thomas whispered. "The storm will cover the sound." They had divided into 3 groups. Isaiah, Thomas, and 4 others would attack the cellar, destroying the equipment and starting the fire. Sarah, Mama Ruth, and 3 more would break into Harrow's study in the main house, planting copies of the testimony and gathering any additional documents about the experiments. Agnes and 2 others would release the horses from the stables and open the gates, not to escape themselves, but to create confusion, to give the aware slaves a chance to flee into the swamp if they chose. "Remember," Isaiah said, "we're not just destroying a building, we're ending a horror. We're making sure what happened here doesn't spread. Whatever happens tonight, we did something that mattered." They clasped hands in the darkness, drawing strength from each other. Then, as the plantation's bell tower struck 10, they moved out into the storm. Isaiah's group reached the barn without incident. The guards, sheltering from the rain, didn't see them approach. The lock on the cellar door yielded quickly to Isaiah's lock-picking. He'd practiced on it before, and his fingers moved with confidence despite the storm. They descended into that chamber of horrors one final time. The cellar looked different tonight, knowing it would be destroyed. The copper instrument seemed less threatening. The chair, where so many had been tortured, was just wood and leather and metal, breakable things. Even the jars of memories, carefully removed from their hiding place and brought here for safekeeping, seemed fragile in the lamplight. "Smash the equipment first," Isaiah ordered. "Everything. Make sure it can never be used again." They set to work with hammers and iron bars stolen from the forge. Glass shattered, copper bent and broke. The chair cracked under repeated blows. The shelves came crashing down, spilling notebooks and papers across the floor. Thomas found Vauclair's complete records, years of experiments, detailed observations, sketches of procedures. "Should we save these?" he asked. "As evidence?" Isaiah hesitated. Part of him wanted to preserve the documentation, to prove what had happened here, but the risk was too great. If these techniques survived in written form, someone else might continue the work. "Burn it all," he decided. "We have our testimony. That's enough." They piled the papers in the center of the room and doused them with oil. Isaiah held the match, watching the flame dance in his hand. This was it, the point of no return. He dropped the match. Fire bloomed across the papers, spreading quickly to the oil-soaked wood. Smoke began to fill the cellar, and the group retreated up the stairs as flames consumed years of twisted science. But as they emerged from the barn, they found themselves facing Marcus and 6 guards. "Thought you were smarter than this," Marcus said in that flat, emotionless voice. "Thought you could destroy the master's work." Isaiah realized with sinking horror that they'd been betrayed. Someone had told the guards, or perhaps Vauclair, paranoid after finding the cellar disturbed before, had posted secret watchers. "It's already burning," Isaiah said, gesturing to the smoke beginning to pour from the barn. "Your happiness room is gone." "Then you'll die for nothing," Marcus replied, and the guards raised their weapons, not guns but clubs, tools meant to maim and capture rather than kill outright. They wanted to make examples of the conspirators, to show what happened to those who resisted. The fight was brief and brutal. Isaiah's group was unarmed, exhausted, outnumbered. Thomas went down first, clubbed across the head. 2 others fell quickly after. Isaiah fought with desperate strength, using his blacksmith's arms to fend off blows, but there were too many. A club caught him across the ribs, and he felt something crack. Another blow struck his shoulder. He fell to his knees in the mud, rain hammering down, tasting blood. But even as he fell, he saw flames spreading from the barn. The fire was taking hold despite the rain, feeding on oil and old wood. The happiness room was burning. Then he heard something that made his broken heart soar, shouting from the main house. Sarah's voice, loud and clear. "Fire! Murder! Help!" She wasn't calling for help with the fire. She was calling for help because of what they'd found in Harrow's study, what she was showing to the visiting plantation owners, even now. The testimony, the proof. Marcus dragged Isaiah to his feet. "The Master wants you alive," he said. "Wants to make you an example." They hauled the captured rebels toward the main house, where chaos had erupted. Plantation owners stood on the porch in their nightclothes, shouting questions. Sarah and Mama Ruth were surrounded by guards, but they'd succeeded. Papers were scattered across the porch, the testimony visible in the lightning flashes. Colonel Harrow emerged, his face twisted with rage. "What is the meaning of this? Who authorized—" "We authorized it," Isaiah said, spitting blood. "We decided we'd rather die than let you turn us into hollow shells. We decided the world needed to know what you've been doing here." One of the visitors, a grey-haired man Isaiah later learned was named Beaumont, picked up one of the scattered pages. He began reading, his expression changing from confusion to horror. "Harrow," he said slowly, "what is this? Electrical experiments, memory suppression, breeding programs." "Slave lies," Harrow said quickly. "You know how they are, always making up stories, trying to stir trouble." "Then explain the fire," Beaumont said, pointing to the barn, which was now fully ablaze despite the rain. "Explain why your slaves are rebelling. Explain these detailed documents describing medical procedures." Dr. Vauclair appeared, his face pale. "The cellar," he said to Harrow. "All my work, years of research, gone." "You fool," Harrow hissed. "You've ruined everything." Oh, the other plantation owners were reading the testimony now, passing pages among themselves. Their expressions ranged from disgust to horror to, in a few cases, a cold calculation that suggested they saw potential in Harrow's methods rather than evil. But Beaumont's voice rang out clearly. "This is an abomination. Harrow, I don't care what you've done to these people, but involving respectable planters in your mad science, making us complicit in this?" He looked at the other visitors. "Gentlemen, I suggest we return home immediately and distance ourselves from this mess." "Wait," another visitor protested. "Some of these techniques might actually be valuable if we could replicate—" "Are you insane?" Beaumont cut him off. "This will be a scandal. Newspapers will hear about it. Abolitionists will use it as ammunition. We need to condemn this publicly, or it will taint all of us." Isaiah watched through pain and rain as the visitors argued among themselves, some horrified, some intrigued, all concerned primarily with their own reputations and interests. None of them seemed to truly see the slaves as people who'd suffered. They were worried about scandal, not justice, but it was enough. The division among the plantation owners, the public nature of what had happened, the fire that even now consumed the evidence of Harrow's experiments, it would be enough to stop the spread. "Lock them up," Harrow finally ordered, gesturing to Isaiah and the other rebels. "We'll deal with them after our guests leave." They were dragged to a storage shed and thrown inside. Isaiah landed hard on the dirt floor, his broken ribs screaming with pain. Around him, the other survivors groaned and shifted. "Did we do it?" Thomas asked through split lips. "Did we stop them?" "The cellar's destroyed," Isaiah confirmed, "and the visitors saw the testimony. Even if they don't care about us, they won't let Harrow continue. The scandal would be too great." "What happens to us now?" Sarah asked. Isaiah didn't answer. They all knew what happened to slaves who rebelled, who destroyed property, who struck back against their masters. Even if Harrow's experiments were condemned, the rebels would be made examples of, beaten, tortured, killed in ways designed to terrorize others into submission. They huddled together in the dark shed, listening to the storm rage outside and the shouting continue from the main house. The barn fire had spread to another outbuilding before the rain finally contained it. The happiness room was gone, reduced to ashes and twisted metal. Hours passed. The storm moved on, leaving the delta dripping and steaming in the darkness. The plantation owners departed in their carriages, some disgusted, some intrigued, all eager to distance themselves from the immediate scandal. Dawn came grey and uncertain. The shed door opened, and guards pulled them out roughly. But it wasn't Colonel Harrow who waited for them. It was Mr. Jessup, the plantation manager, looking haggard and uncertain. "Colonel Harrow and Dr. Vauclair fled during the night," he announced. "Took horses and headed north, left me to clean up this mess." He looked at the rebels with something that might have been respect, or might have been exhaustion. "You've destroyed valuable property. You've cost this plantation thousands of dollars. By rights, I should have you all hanged." "Then do it," Isaiah said quietly. "We knew the cost when we started." Jessup shook his head. "Can't. Mr. Beaumont, the visitor who read your testimony, he's threatened to bring this to the newspapers if there are more atrocities. Said the public wouldn't stand for slaves being executed for destroying torture equipment." He laughed bitterly. "So you're being sold, split up, and sent to different plantations across the state. Punishment enough, I suppose, never seeing each other again." It was a different kind of death, the death of their fellowship, their shared resistance. But it was life. Broken, scattered life, but life nonetheless. Over the next few days, as they waited to be sold, Isaiah and the others watched Oak Valley slowly disintegrate. The visitors had spread word of what they'd found. Other slaves in the region heard about the uprising, about the happiness room's destruction. No one wanted to be sold to Oak Valley anymore. No one wanted to buy Oak Valley's slaves, tainted as they were by the scandal. Agnes approached Isaiah on his last day there. "Some of them are coming back," she said quietly. "What?" "The ones who went through the treatments. With the cellar destroyed, with Vauclair gone, some of them are showing signs of recovery. Samuel asked about his wife yesterday." Marcus looked confused for a moment, like he was trying to remember something. Isaiah felt a surge of hope. "The jars," he said, "the memory vessels, did they survive the fire?" "No," Agnes said. "They were destroyed with everything else." "Then how?" "Maybe Vauclair's theories were wrong," Agnes suggested. "Maybe the memories were never really gone, just suppressed. Maybe without the constant reinforcement of the treatments, people can start to heal." Isaiah looked across the plantation at Marcus, who stood by the barn's ruins. As he watched, the big man's face twisted, not with the blank expression of before, but with something like grief or confusion. He raised one hand to his head, as if it ached. "Or maybe," Isaiah said softly, "the mind is stronger than they thought. Maybe you can't really destroy someone's soul, just hurt it, and hurt things can heal." The day came when they were all separated. Isaiah was sold to a plantation in Mississippi. Sarah went to Alabama. Thomas, Mama Ruth, and the others were scattered across Louisiana. They said their farewells, knowing they'd never see each other again, but carrying the memory of what they'd done together. As the wagon carried Isaiah away from Oak Valley, he looked back at the ruins of the barn, at the main house where Harrow had orchestrated such horror, at the fields where broken people were slowly, painfully beginning to remember who they'd been. The happiness room was destroyed. The experiments had ended. The horror would not spread. It was enough. It had to be enough. 3 years had passed since the night Oak Valley burned, but Isaiah still dreamed of copper instruments and glass jars gleaming in lamplight. He woke from these dreams in his cabin on the Thornton Plantation in Mississippi, gasping for air, his heart racing with remembered terror. The Thornton Plantation was brutal in the conventional way: hard work, poor food, the ever-present threat of the lash. But compared to Oak Valley, it was almost a relief. Here, at least, Isaiah's mind remained his own. No one tried to steal his memories, to hollow him out from the inside. He'd become a respected blacksmith here, his skills valuable enough that he received marginally better treatment than the field workers. And in the 3 years since Oak Valley, he'd quietly spread the story of what had happened there, telling it to every slave who passed through, every traveler, every peddler who might carry the tale further. The story had grown in the telling, had taken on aspects of legend. Some versions claimed Harrow had been possessed by demons. Others said Vauclair had been a vampire, feeding on souls. Isaiah didn't correct these embellishments. The supernatural elements made the story memorable, ensured it would be passed down, remembered, warned against. What mattered was that everyone knew there had been a place where they tried to destroy the very idea of freedom, and that place had been brought down by those who refused to forget who they were. On a humid evening in June 1837, a stranger arrived at the Thornton Plantation. He was a free black man, a rare sight in Mississippi, carrying papers that gave him the right to travel and conduct business. His name was William, and he'd come looking for Isaiah specifically. They met after the day's work, away from listening ears, in the small grove of trees where the plantation slaves sometimes gathered for secret prayer meetings. "I've been looking for you for months," William said, "following the stories, the rumors, trying to find the blacksmith who burned down the happiness room." Isaiah studied him carefully. "Who's asking?" "People who are trying to document what happened. People who believe these stories need to be preserved, not just as legends, but as truth." William pulled out a worn notebook. "I'm collecting testimonies, first-hand accounts of the worst atrocities of slavery. Your story, the real story, not the legend, needs to be recorded." Isaiah told him everything: the arrival at Oak Valley, the eerie silence of the workers, the discovery of the cellar, Vauclair's experiments, the jars of memories, the uprising, the destruction. William wrote it all down in careful script, asking questions, seeking details, creating a record. "What happened to the others?" William asked. "The people you fought alongside?" "Scattered," Isaiah said. "Sold to different plantations. I heard that Thomas died. Fever took him about a year ago. Sarah, I don't know. Mama Ruth might still be in Louisiana. We promised we'd never forget each other, but that's a hard promise to keep when you're property, when you can be moved at someone else's whim." "And what about Oak Valley itself? The plantation?" Isaiah had heard things, rumors carried by travelers and traders. "It never recovered. Harrow disappeared. Some say he went to Europe, others that he killed himself. The plantation was sold, but no one wanted to work it. Too many stories about ghosts, about voices in the night. The new owner tried to bring in new slaves, but they'd hear the stories and refuse to work, become troublesome. Eventually, he gave up. The place has been abandoned for over a year now." William made notes. Then he looked up at Isaiah with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "There's something else. I've been hearing reports of people recovering, slaves who were at Oak Valley during the experiments, who seemed completely broken, starting to remember things. Not everyone, and not all the way, but enough to suggest that what Vauclair did wasn't permanent." Isaiah felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "Marcus? I don't know specific names, but the reports are consistent. With the treatment stopped, with Vauclair gone, people are healing, slowly, incompletely, but healing nonetheless. They talked for hours, William recording everything. When they finally parted, Isaiah felt a strange sense of completion. His story would be preserved, would become part of a larger record. Future generations would know what had happened at Oak Valley. But that night, Isaiah couldn't sleep. Something about William's visit had stirred old memories, old responsibilities, the jars, the memory vessels. He'd thought they were destroyed in the fire, but what if some had survived? What if fragments of people's stolen selves still existed, waiting to be recovered? He made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who knew the risks. He decided to go back to Oak Valley. It took months to plan. Isaiah worked extra jobs, saving the tiny amounts of money he was occasionally allowed to keep. He cultivated relationships with traders and travelers, gathering information about routes, about safe places to hide, about how a slave might move through the countryside without being caught. Finally, in October of 1837, he made his move. During the chaos of harvest season, when everyone was distracted and exhausted, Isaiah slipped away. He moved at night, hid during the day, followed the stars and the stories of escaped slaves before him. It should have been impossible, a lone slave traveling hundreds of miles through hostile territory. But Isaiah had something most runaways didn't: a specific destination and a specific purpose. He wasn't running toward freedom. He was returning to the site of his greatest terror, looking for something he didn't even know still existed. 3 weeks after leaving Mississippi, Isaiah stood at the edge of Oak Valley Plantation as the sun rose over the delta. The place looked like something from a nightmare given physical form. The main house stood empty, windows broken, paint peeling. The slave cabins had collapsed in on themselves. Vines and kudzu had begun reclaiming the buildings, pulling them back into the swamp from which they'd been carved. But it was the silence that struck Isaiah most powerfully. No birds sang here, no insects buzzed. It was as if even nature avoided the place, as if the horror that had occurred here had poisoned the very land. Isaiah moved cautiously across the compound, memories flooding back with every step. There was the cabin where he'd slept that first night. There was the forge where he'd worked. There, half collapsed and charred, was the barn. The barn's ruins looked like the skeleton of some massive beast. Burned timbers jutted up like ribs. The roof had caved in, and morning mist swirled through the wreckage like ghosts. Isaiah approached the place where the cellar entrance had been. The stairs were partially collapsed, burned and rotted, but passable if he was careful. He lit a torch he'd brought, just wrapped cloth soaked in pitch, and descended into what remained of the happiness room. The cellar was a tomb. 3 years of abandonment, of water damage and decay had reduced it to a disaster. The ceiling sagged dangerously. Mold covered everything. The copper instruments that hadn't melted in the fire had turned green with verdigris. But Isaiah searched methodically, moving through the rubble, looking for any sign that the jars had survived. He found the first one in a corner, miraculously intact despite everything. The glass was dirty, the label faded, but he could still make out the name Samuel, Memories of Wife and Children. Isaiah's hands shook as he carefully lifted it. The tissue inside had degraded, dissolved into murky liquid. Whatever pseudo-scientific theory Vauclair had believed about storing memories in physical form, it was clear nothing remained that could be recovered. But Isaiah kept searching, finding more jars. Marcus, Betty, others whose names he'd never learned. Some were broken, some intact, but all contained only degraded organic matter. No memories could be recovered from these. The physical vessels were empty. Yet William had said people were healing. If not from these jars, then how? Isaiah sat in the ruined cellar, surrounded by the remnants of Vauclair's twisted science, and understood. The memories had never been in the jars. That had been Vauclair's delusion, his pseudo-scientific theater. What he'd actually been doing was suppressing memories chemically and electrically, not extracting them. Which meant everyone who'd been through the happiness room still possessed their full memories deep down. They'd been blocked, hidden behind chemical and electrical barriers, but not destroyed. And without the constant reinforcement of the treatments, those barriers were breaking down. The jars were meaningless. The jars had always been meaningless. Isaiah started to laugh, a bitter, exhausted sound that echoed in the ruined cellar. They'd fought so hard to protect these glass vessels, thinking they contained fragments of people's souls, but the souls had been there all along, suppressed but unbroken, waiting for their chance to resurface. A sound from above froze his laughter in his throat. Footsteps on the barn floor. Multiple people. Isaiah extinguished his torch and pressed himself against the cellar wall, barely breathing. Had he been followed? Had slave catchers tracked him here? Voices drifted down, but not the voices of white men. These were the voices of slaves, speaking in low, urgent tones. "You sure he said to meet here? This is the place, Oak Valley, where the happiness room was destroyed." Isaiah recognized one of the voices, Thomas, but Thomas was dead. Isaiah had heard that he'd died of fever over a year ago. He climbed the collapsed stairs carefully, emerging into the barn ruins. 5 figures stood in the morning light, and as they turned to face him, Isaiah felt tears spring to his eyes. Thomas, alive and whole. Sarah, thinner but unbroken. Mama Ruth, looking older but strong. And 2 others he didn't recognize, young people who'd been children during the Oak Valley uprising. "Isaiah?" Sarah's voice was disbelieving. She rushed forward, and they embraced like the family they'd become in those dark days 3 years ago. "I thought you were dead," Isaiah said to Thomas. "The fever almost did kill me," Thomas admitted. "They told everyone I'd died, sold my body to a medical school, but I recovered and escaped during the transport. Figured if they thought I was dead, they wouldn't look for me." "We've all escaped," Mama Ruth explained. "Not running north, not yet. First we had to come back here. We had to see if the jars survived, if there was any way to help the others recover." Isaiah showed them what he'd found. The broken and degraded jars, the meaningless tissue samples. He explained his realization that the memories had never been extracted at all. "So everyone can heal," Sarah said slowly. "Everyone who went through that room can eventually remember." "Maybe not completely," Isaiah cautioned. "The damage was real. But yes, more than Vauclair ever intended." They stood together in the ruins, these 5 survivors of Oak Valley's horror, and made a decision. They would not continue north to freedom, not yet. First, they would find the others, all the slaves who'd been at Oak Valley and then scattered. They would tell them that healing was possible, that their memories and selves could be recovered. It would take years, it would be dangerous, but it was necessary. "We're witnesses," Mama Ruth said. "We saw what happened here, we survived it, and now we have to make sure no one ever forgets, that no one ever tries this again." They spent the rest of that day in the ruins of Oak Valley, gathering physical evidence, fragments of Vauclair's instruments, pieces of the chair, pages from his notebooks that had somehow survived the fire. These would become relics, proof of what had occurred. As the sun set over the delta, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, they prepared to leave Oak Valley for the last time. But before they did, Sarah had one more task. She'd brought a chisel and hammer, and she spent an hour carving words into one of the barn's surviving support beams, high enough that it might endure even as the rest collapsed. Here stood the happiness room where freedom was forgotten but never destroyed. We remember 1834, 1837. They left Oak Valley as darkness fell, moving into the swamp, heading toward the long and dangerous journey ahead. Behind them, the ruins gradually sank back into the delta mud, reclaimed by nature. Over the following years, stories continued to circulate about Oak Valley. Travelers claimed to hear voices at night, not ghostly moans, but something else. Conversations, arguments, Laughter, the sounds of people remembering who they were, piecing their fractured selves back together. Some said it was the spirits of those who died during the experiments. Others believed it was the actual freed slaves, returned to the site of their trauma to help each other heal. The truth was probably a mixture of both. Oak Valley became a meeting place, a pilgrimage site for those who'd survived the happiness room. They came in secret, at great risk, to share what they remembered, to help each other fill in the gaps that Vauclair's treatments had created. Isaiah returned to Oak Valley 3 more times in his life. Each time he found evidence that others had been there, offerings left at the barn ruins, new carvings in the wood, signs that the place had become a memorial of sorts. The last time he visited was in 1851, 17 years after the uprising. He was an old man by then, his body worn down by decades of brutal labor. He'd never made it to freedom, had spent those years quietly sabotaging plantations from within, teaching other slaves to read, spreading the story of Oak Valley everywhere he went. On that final visit, he found the barn had almost completely collapsed. The inscription Sarah had carved was barely visible, worn by weather and time, but someone had added new words below it. The seeds of freedom cannot be destroyed, only forgotten, and we will not forget. Isaiah sat in the ruins as the sun set, thinking about all the people whose minds had been violated here, about the resistance they'd mounted, about the incomplete victory they'd won. They hadn't freed themselves, they hadn't overthrown the system, but they'd stopped one particular horror from spreading, had preserved the testimony of what happened, had proven that the human spirit could resist even the most sophisticated attempts to break it. As darkness fell, Isaiah heard them, the voices, not ghosts exactly, but echoes, fragments of conversations from 3 years ago, from 10 years ago, from last week. The voices of people remembering, healing, becoming whole again. "We're still here," Isaiah whispered to the darkness. "They tried to make us forget, but we're still here." He left Oak Valley for the final time that night, walking slowly through the swamp as fog rolled in from the river. Behind him, the ruins stood like a monument to the worst and best of human nature, the cruelty that could be inflicted, and the resilience that survived it. Isaiah died 2 years later, still enslaved, never having tasted legal freedom. But in the years since, the story of Oak Valley has persisted. It's been told and retold, embellished and modified, but always carrying the essential truth at its core. There was a place where they tried to destroy the very concept of freedom, where they attempted to reshape the human mind itself, to accept slavery without question. And that place was brought down by those who refused to forget who they were, who protected their memories and identities with everything they had. The site of Oak Valley Plantation sits empty still. The delta has reclaimed it almost completely. Spanish moss hangs from the trees. Alligators patrol the waterways. The buildings have collapsed into the mud, but travelers along the river still report hearing voices at night, whispered conversations, names called out, fragments of songs. Some say it's the wind, others claim it's the ghosts of those who suffered there, but perhaps it's something else entirely. Perhaps it's the sound of memories that refused to die, of humanity that couldn't be suppressed, of freedom that lived on even in the darkest places. Perhaps it's the echo of resistance carried forward through generations, a reminder that no matter how sophisticated the chains, how advanced the methods of control, the human desire for freedom and dignity cannot be truly destroyed, only forgotten, and we will not forget.